दो लोग दिल्ली में बैठ के सब डिसाइड कर रहे हैं. The system is so broken that it needs to be completely dismantled before it gets fixed. What sort of an incompetent, inept, corrupt, disgusting government can you have that puts the lives of its own citizens at risk?
Is it true that in Indian politics, if you want to enter as a youth, you need to have money, पैसा, गाड़ी, muscle power?
कुछ मुद्दे की बात करने जा रहे हो तो जैसे आपने बोला कि पार्लियामेंट में भी बोलने से पहले म्यूट हो जाता है.
You automatically assume कि अच्छा मुसलमान देश है तो हमारे खिलाफ. My biggest fear before ever coming out, मैं डेटिंग ऐप पे जाऊंगा और फिर मेरी फोटो टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया के फ्रंट पेज पे छपेगी.
It's called Grindr and
oh yeah, Tinder also,
अच्छा,
Hinge
Tinder,
also,
हाँ.
Bumble also. तो ये सभी मेंस राइट्स एक्टिविस्ट जो सुन रहे हैं, प्लीज आप सुनिए और आपकी प्रिय मोदी सरकार को बोल दीजिए कि put 377 back.
parliamentarians are able to say anything. You are a spokesperson, you can say anything. कोई कॉमन इंसान अगर कुछ बोलता है तो क्या होता है उसके साथ?
UAPA लग जाता है. Sedition does not exist anymore. Sedition हमने हटा दिया.
We have seen an increase in Islamophobic sentiments.
मतलब तालियां बजानी चाहिए मोदी सरकार के लिए. Never heard Arundhati Rohan, Jesai Deepak mentioning the same sentence. What world have we come on to? जियो हजारों साल था रूसा. Why is it happening?
Is this feminism?
You know, no. We'll stop it there, but no.
Your vote matters. A strong democracy begins with responsible voting. आपका वोट इम्पॉर्टेंट है. एक स्ट्रॉन्ग डेमोक्रेसी की शुरुआत होती है रिस्पॉन्सिबल वोटिंग से.
Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Filter Khatam, and I'm your co-host Zoya.
I'm Lakshya, as I go by Lakshya Speaks. And today we have with us someone very interesting, someone who happens to be the first queer politician from India, and someone who is again directly affiliated to a political party. I'm going to ask him some very interesting questions, and a lot of questions are from the audience too today. So today we have with us Anish Gawande.
Hello. Thank you to both of you for having me on board.
Of course, you're welcome. So Anish, let's just dive deep in, straight up. Are you okay with that? हाँ. चलो सबसे पहले बात करते हैं that 2019 में Anish came out as a gay man in India, and that too with a political background. Was your parents' reaction something that you had expected, or would you have expected them to react another way?
You know, there's a longer answer to this question, a shorter answer to this question. पहले मैं आपको लंबा सुना देता हूँ. So, I came out to myself in 2015. I was in my first year of college. I was just coming out. I was like, अच्छा चलो, I'm in New York City. I'm studying. I can finally come out of the closet. और तभी I had fully thought that there's no chance I'm coming back home. I grew up in a fairly conservative Maharashtrian family. I was concerned that my family would not accept me, but more importantly that society at large would not accept me. तभी 377 was still on the statute books. It was technically still a crime to be gay. And so for me at that moment, it was never even a possibility that I will come out publicly. But fast forward to a couple of years later, I was back home for Diwali. Everyone was at home for Diwali in Pune with my extended family. And I'd already come out to my brother and sisters before. And I came out to my entire family then. And they were incredibly warm, incredibly supporting, and incredibly loving. And that kind of flipped a switch. That allowed me to say ki chalo, if they're with me, then I don't care. So when I came back to India in 2018, I had come to work on a political campaign. I've narrated the story many times before, but basically my boss at the time, Milind Devra, had asked me ki aakar mera campaign chalaoge? And I was like, I'm very out and in New York City. What do you mean campaign chalaoge? And he's like, so? मैंने कहा, what? So? And I came back, traveled across the length and breadth of Maharashtra at that point with the Janasangharsha Yatra for the Congress party, and realized that there was more acceptance for queer rights than before. And in 2019, I started Pinklist India. And my biggest fear before ever coming out was कि मैं डेटिंग ऐप पे जाऊंगा और फिर मेरी फोटो टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया के फ्रंट पेज पे छपेगी. कुछ थोड़ा मेगालोमेनिया इज आल्सो नीडेड इन पॉलिटिक्स. उसके सिवा आप नहीं बन सकते राजनीति में सक्सेसफुल. तो आई वाज लाइक, बाप रे, आई विल बिकम फ्रंट पेज टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया. एंड वंस आई स्टार्टेड पिंकलिस्ट इंडिया, देयर वाज अ टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया इंटरव्यू that took place, which came in the Sunday Times of India in a more prime real estate spot in the newspaper than the front page, which was on the opinion page, next to Shobhade's column.
Wow.
तो हमारी इतनी बड़ी फोटो छप गई थी with the title that said, "You always told you can't be queer and in politics that needs to change." और फिर बस that was when I came out to the world at large. But over time, and I want to correct you क्योंकि आपने कहा first queer politician, वो तो हम नहीं है, because we've actually had many queer politicians before. Kamla Jan was the first trans woman to become a corporator. We had Shabnam Mausi, who became an MLA from Madhya Pradesh on an incredibly powerful sort of anti-Hindutva platform, funnily enough. And we've had several other incredible people like Disha Pinky Sheikh, who's an anti-DNT woman from Maharashtra, who's a trans woman, who's the spokesperson for the Vanchit Bahujan Aghadi, who all come on to this sort of space before me. Priya Patil, my own party member, who was in my party long before and who heads the LGBT cell, is a trans woman who's been doing amazing work in politics. So, बहुत बड़ा momentum movement है. There haven't been gay or lesbian politicians before. That is definitely something that is a first, and openly gay national spokesperson is certainly a title I've held since last year. And in a funny way, and we'll discuss this further, it's where this sort of pyramid of privilege has been inversed in politics, perhaps for the better.
मैंने ये देखा कि हमने 377 के बारे में आपने भी बताया और आप डेटिंग एप्स के बारे में भी बता रहे थे, तो there is only one dating app for queer people in India that most people use. It's called Grindr. And
Oh yeah, Tinder also,
अच्छा,
Hinge
Tinder,
also,
हाँ.
Bumble also.
नहीं मतलब यूजुअली तो अच्छा, सो व्हाई डू पीपल यूज ग्राइंडर? चलो उसके बारे में बाद में बात करेंगे.
तो उसके बारे में बात करें तो हमें लगा दें उसके बारे में बाद में बात करेंगे.
But there has been a rise in sexual violence against men, by men, and against transgender people as well as against animals. And we changed this entire IPC to the new BNS, and we still don't protect these people.
You know, the big movement was against Section 377, right? Because we wanted to allow consensual sex, right? The definition of 377 was the problem. Because the law said carnal intercourse against the order of nature. तो petition Supreme Court के सामने था कि 377 को read down करो, हटाओ मत. Because you still need Section 377 for bestiality. You still need Section 377 critically for sexual assault against men. Today, the government in all of its wisdom has removed the only law that existed to criminalize sexual assault against men. तो ये सभी men's rights activists जो सुन रहे हैं, please आप सुनिए और आपकी प्रिय मोदी सरकार को बोल दीजिए कि put 377 back. Because this is the problem with the country today, कि policy बनानी तो आती नहीं, पॉलिसी हटाने जा रहे हैं और बीएनएस के नाम पे इन्होंने दी ओनली सर्वाइविंग प्रोटेक्शन फॉर मेल विक्टिम्स ऑफ सेक्सुअल असॉल्ट हटा दिया है एंड दी ओनली सर्वाइविंग प्रोटेक्शन फॉर एनिमल्स अगेंस्ट बिस्टियलिटी. आई एम श्योर यू सीन हॉरिफाइंग वीडियोज ऑफ rapes of dogs, cows, anything on this planet which used to be criminalized but which can't be criminalized now. So you're now seeing this strange situation today where a policy measure that was seen as progressive by the government, उन्होंने सोचा होगा wow we're going to give ourselves a pat on the back, हमने 377 हटा दिया, has actually turned into a disaster. But this is not limited to 377. आप sedition का कानून देख लो. Sedition does not exist anymore. Sedition हमने हटा दिया. What did you replace it with? An even more stringent law that has even vaguer provisions that is worse than British era sedition law. मतलब तालियां बजानी चाहिए मोदी सरकार के लिए, because imagine coming up with a worse law than the colonizers. So ये तो BNS के साथ हमारे बड़े सारे प्रॉब्लम है, पर पार्लियामेंट में हमारी बात कोई सुनता नहीं है. So we have to come here and discuss them in the hope that one day somebody will listen.
Talking of LGBT rights and coming from, say, the Ambedkarite perspective, one of the causes which we talk about is that we need, obviously the government has provisions for reservation for transgender people in India, but it's not horizontal.
Yes.
Your party stands on it and yours stands on it. Do you guys
we support horizontal reservations for transgender persons, because this is not even a party stance issue or a question of ideological positions, right? It's logical. Trans identities are gender identities. It's like women's reservation. आपके लिए women's reservation के नीचे भी SC reservation, ST reservation और OBC reservation हमेशा होता है. तो ट्रांसजेंडर रिजर्वेशन में ये अलग कैटेगरीज क्यों नहीं? Because what you will essentially end up doing then is privileging those who are already in positions of privilege, right? Because sexuality does not preclude caste, right? Sexuality or gender does not absolve you or liberate you from caste in and of itself. So a true revolutionary politics or emancipatory politics needs to acknowledge that transgender reservation needs to have a set list of criteria for horizontal reservations to operate. But unfortunately, despite this coming up before the Supreme Court, despite this being proposed to lawmakers, there doesn't seem to be sustained interest on the issue. And I don't think we've managed to really unlock what a reservation debate can really mean for the trans community and how the fight for that reservation can be taken forward. क्योंकि आप अगर आज देखने जाओ तो reservation movements are most successful when they are for communities that are geographically concentrated and are very important vote banks. The problem with transgender rights and with LGBTQ plus rights in general is that the community is dispersed. It's not like एक ही इलाके में सभी queer लोग हैं या सभी trans लोग हैं. And so the fight for reservation becomes very difficult because who is going to become your champion, right? And where are you going to draw your political capital from? So that has been a very significant challenge.
That's true. And talking about this 377, that it was removed, but we need a law to address that particular issue, which is sexual assault towards men. If I.N.D.I Alliance comes to power, would we be expecting something along those lines?
I think it's presumptuous of me to be speaking on behalf of the entire I.N.D.I Alliance. But I.N.D.I Alliance, you बोल रहे हैं I.N.D.I Alliance हम बोलते हैं. I'm also saying I.N.D.I Alliance over here. But I.N.D.I Alliance, potato. But yes. But what we will push for, or at least what I will push for, is a law that also recognizes that a specific law for sexual assault against men cannot be used to push for a blanket gender neutral provision for all laws. Because unfortunately you have a big movement today and there are people who support it for valid reasons that says कि कोई भी gendered law हटाना चाहिए. कि रेप पे जो जेंडर्ड लॉ है, एलिमनी पे भी जो जेंडर्ड लॉ है, डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस पे जो जेंडर्ड लॉ है, उसको हटा दो, which is a big problem, right? We must acknowledge that men can also face sexual assault without rejecting the fact that it is disproportionately women who bear the brunt of sexual assault and silently, without the power to go to a court, without the power to go to a police station. So ये nuance बहुत जल्दी गायब हो जाता है in this conversation around men's rights activists, women's rights activists, ये वो. That I think needs to be brought into a lawmaking perspective.
To the audience watching this, the loudest voices for real men's rights activism in India, it actually comes from the queer community. And the queer community are the ones which these, the quote-unquote men's rights activists always demonize.
Correct. So, they are the ones who come against us in all of these TV debates. But never thought I'd say this, but we might have more in common with men's rights activists than we would have presumed. So, aap bhi aa jao. We're a big umbrella. And in our fight against oppressive regimes, we can all be united.
The fight against an oppressive regime shouldn't come with misogyny, goes without saying.
Correct. Men's rights without harming women's rights.
हमने देखा कि आप मीडिया में बहुत जाते हैं इंटरव्यू देने के लिए. मैंने कुछ कभी-कभी पर्सनली भी देखा है आपके इंटरव्यूज और मैंने बहुत बार
टीवी देखते हैं
वो एंटरटेनमेंट के लिए.
अच्छा.
कभी-कभी म्यूट
या आप रील्स पे देखते हैं क्योंकि हमारे
तो स्टोरी डालते हो कि अब टीवी में आने वाले हैं तो हम तो लॉग इन कर लेते हैं. फिर
देखो लॉग इन कर लेते. कोई किसी के घर में टीवी नहीं है आजकल. ये सब बोल देते कि यूट्यूब पे देखते हैं टीवी या जियो टीवी पे देखते हैं.
तो मैं देख रही थी कि मतलब आप कुछ मुद्दे की बात करने जा रहे हो तो जैसे आपने बोला कि पार्लियामेंट में भी बोलने से पहले म्यूट हो जाता है.
हाँ जी.
है ना. टीवी शो टीवी मीडिया पे भी ऐसे कैसे हो रहा है. तो फिर मतलब आप करने क्या चाहते हो वहाँ पे.
देखिए हम तो अच्छे दिखने जा रहे हैं. So as an opposition spokesperson you are seen more than you are heard. And so the reality is that you go on TV to make a point even when you're not allowed to make a point. So कोई हम पर चिल्ला रहा होता है तो हम शांत बैठते हैं, हम वापस नहीं चिल्लाते. कोई बुजुर्ग अंकल है जो हम पर चिल्ला रहे हैं वही थोड़े मतलब हिपोक्रिटिकल लगते हैं क्योंकि दे आर ट्राइंग टू मेक अ पॉइंट अबाउट बीइंग डेमोक्रेटिक व्हाइल बीइंग अनडेमोक्रेटिक. You can use your facial expressions to mock somebody as they're speaking and say कि all of these points that you've raised are completely irrelevant. आज हमारी डिबेट हो रही थी टीवी चैनल पे वोट चोरी पे. Suddenly the debate was derailed by taking 10 Muslim names. कभी भी आपके पास point नहीं है तो 10 मुसलमानों के नाम लगा दो. I mean, this is the reality, right? And after a point, you can't debate it. You have to laugh at it. You have to be like, I refuse to even engage, because the point you're making is so absurd that even engaging with it means that I will be stooping to your level. And you know what they say about wrestling with a pig? You get dirty in the process, worse, pig likes it.
अभी एक गैग ऑर्डर रिलीज हुआ है फॉर अ पर्टिकुलर लैंड जहाँ पे वो 1 रुपए में बेच दी गई है ना. मैं नाम तो नहीं लूंगी बिकॉज मुझे भी डर
हम तो
लगता
किसी
है.
गैग ऑर्डर के खिलाफ नहीं जाते.
हाँ, मैं नाम नहीं लूंगी, बट मैं ये बोलना चाहती हूँ कि मतलब 5 दिन के अंदर इतने आराम से जस्टिस मिल गया, और जो यहाँ पे रेप विक्टिम्स है सालों साल तक कोर्ट में घसीटे जाते हैं.
उमर खालिद है 5 साल से जेल में बैठे हुए, गुलफिशा है 5 साल से जेल में बैठी हुई है.
तो ये किस टाइप का जस्टिस है?
देखिए, आज प्रॉब्लम ये है कि हम सुप्रीम कोर्ट के दरवाजे हर चीज के लिए खटखटा रहे हैं. आई थिंक दिस इज द लार्जेस्ट सिस्टेमिक प्रॉब्लम, राइट? आई डोंट थिंक any of these issues individually are enough to discuss in and of themselves, right? Because the same system that is giving justice to some in record time is denying justice to others over years. And the ones even who we speak about who are denied justice are a small fraction of countless others who are facing even greater injustice. So, you know, Umar is in jail for 5 years, Gulfisha is in jail for 5 years, the others are in jail for 5 years. पर इतने सारे अंडर ट्रायल्स है जो 15, 20, 30, 40 साल इस सिस्टम के वजह से रगड़ रहे अपनी जिंदगी जेल में, जिनके बारे में कोई बात नहीं करता. You know, funnily enough, it was President Draupadi Murmu who raised the issue of the slowness of the criminal justice system in an incredible speech not too long ago, which is a hallmark speech that must be seen by everybody. But unfortunately, that speech has not translated into any action. आज आप अगर देखने जाओ तो these gag orders or guidelines cannot and should not be passed by a court. What do you have a political executive for? हर एक केस सेंसर बोर्ड वाली केस सुप्रीम कोर्ट तक जाती है. हर एक केस which is about freedom of speech सुप्रीम कोर्ट तक जाती है. You know, we need to have certain set principles which ensure that you don't have to go all the way to the top court of the land to protect basic liberties, because otherwise you're treating the court like the executive. फिर हमने सरकार को क्यों चुना है? Why is the government elected? Then they should also retire and sit at home. 75 years old.
राइट्स का ट्राइब्यूनल बना देते हैं चलो.
पर ट्राइब्यूनल की भी जरूरत नहीं है ना. मैं वही कह रहा हूँ, the violation of fundamental rights is something that you must apply political pressure on the government for. That you must treat this as a violation of basic human dignity that you punish a politician for, not beg in front of a judge for. So the change that has to come, you know, I can hope that the Supreme Court sort of gets its act together, or I can hope that justice is not delayed, because justice delayed is justice denied. But the reality is, जब तक आप सरकार नहीं बदलोगी, नियत और नीति में बहुत फर्क होता है. नीति कितनी भी अच्छी हो, नियत अगर बुरी हो तो उस नीति का कोई फायदा नहीं.
Talking about politics, you are from the NCP, and the allegation from a lot of people, they attack you that the NCP is mostly becoming a dynastic party. It's like one family which largely controls it. And the other allegation is that politics these days is becoming unideological. आप कोई भी opposite ideology के लोगों के साथ alliance बना लेते हो, आपकी पार्टी भी split हुई, और आप दोनों splits of the party made alliance with a party which has an opposite ideology in many ways. So are we moving to what if your party has an ideology, are you really sticking to it? And
Absolutely. So I'll tell you this, right? The NCP, particularly the NCP SP today, or any political party led by Sharad Pawar, believes in Shiva Shahu Phule Ambedkar's ideology. We are a party that has grown out of Swargya Yashwantrao Chauhan's legacy. We're a party that has grown out of a progressive tradition in Maharashtra that stretches across the Bhakti movement to the anti-caste movement to contemporary forms of social justice movements, including the queer movement and the disability rights movement, that all feed into a progressive politics that is inherent to the DNA of the party, right? So there's no question about a compromise on the party's ideology. To give him some credit, although I will take away a lot of that credit because allying with the BJP is a disaster in the present circumstances, Even Ajit Dada, who split off from our party, has to continuously reaffirm his secular traditions every single day today. He has to call out the BJP when they make hateful comments. He has to call out the BJP when their MLA makes obscene comments about my former party president, Jayant Patil, right? So the DNA of the party is such that your ground level karyakarta will take his chappal out and hit you if you decide to become a party that does not uphold progressive values. And the question comes of alliances. I think the alliance that was formed in Maharashtra was one that was formed for very specific political reasons, right? The Mahavikas Aghadi was created with a specific charter in mind. There was a common minimum program. There was an agreement that we are ideologically different. There was a recognition of the fact that, of course, the NCP and the Shiv Sena don't look eye to eye on some matters. Of course, the Shiv Sena and the Congress don't look eye to eye on some matters. Of course, we have very different sort of opinions on Hindutva. We have very different opinions on language. We have very different opinions on even sort of issues like caste and progressive politics as a whole. But what is the agenda that you can bring before the people of Maharashtra when the opposite side is destroying every single institution in front of you? And you saw that in action. The COVID-19 pandemic, Maharashtra performed better than every other state in the country. I'm proud to say that our government at that point ensured that a jumbo center was created in a city like Mumbai that prevented thousands of preventable deaths that happened in a city like Delhi. I was getting phone calls about oxygen cylinders in Delhi, and I have made phone calls to every single government office over here, every single influential politician here. Even they could not get oxygen cylinders. People I know have died. That's shameful in your national capital. What sort of an incompetent, inept, corrupt, disgusting government can you have that puts the lives of its own citizens at risk, even in the time of a national calamity or national emergency? That's a very extreme example. But in a state like Maharashtra today, after the government changed hands, you've seen the state of our infrastructure. 2 weeks after the Mumbai Metro 3 is built, it floods. A few months after the Mumbai monorail has apparently had some fixes, it shuts down in the rain. Just a few weeks ago, you saw the Atal Setu, which was just built, having potholes on it so severe that 2 entire lanes had to be shut off. I mean, this is gross negligence with no accountability. So, to correct that, you needed to have an alliance that came together.
Makes sense. One of our politically aware followers made the question, the NCP is known to be a split party from the Congress. So what has been your relationship, not your instance, the party's relationship with the Congress party, and are there any ideological differences as such? And if there are no ideological differences, why don't you merge back again?
हम भी थोड़े कांग्रेस के split वाले ही इंसान हैं. I used to be with the Congress party for almost 10 years with Milind Devra. Then he split and I split here. But we've often said that we are ideologically aligned with the Congress party, right? I think in many ways, the positions that we have on a lot of important national issues mirror those of the Congress party. But we have a slightly different identity of our own as well. So on some issues, we will take a different stance. So for example, after the Pahalgam attacks, we said it is not important to have a special session of parliament because that was not the moment for us to discuss this issue in a way that would only add to the divisive rhetoric we were seeing around us. Sir, nahi, abhi iska time nahi hai. On other issues, we might have a slightly more sort of nuanced narrative, right? For example, with vote chori, we believe that vote chori is not just about voter addition, voter deletion or EVM, but also about things like symbol allocation and about the minutiae. We think that it's a death by 1,000 cuts, right? That the functioning of the election commission as a whole needs to be investigated because otherwise people will lose faith in the democratic institution. So you've gotten a certain aspiration, of course, that's led to the creation of the party, which is to come to power in Maharashtra. You've also got a certain level of autonomy that you get in some ways when you're away from the Congress party that allows you to function as an effective alliance partner. So the question of a merger is far away because I think we've managed to demonstrate that we can do fairly well on our own, winning 8 out of 10 Lok Sabha seats.
So one criticism of the I.N.D.I Alliance from a lot of people is that Hindutva or the BJP, the party, they governance aside, they do have a vision. They do have an ideology that this is what we want. We want a certain Hindu Rashtra or things of that direction. And what is the counter narrative? Like I've seen a lot of I.N.D.I Alliance people criticizing the government. ये आपने ये बुरा किया, वो बुरा किया. But आपके तरफ से what is the alternative model which you're showing the country?
You know, the fundamental crisis in India today is a crisis of political imagination. I've said this before and I'm very happy to say it now and publicly as well, is that the opposition has failed to craft an effective and cohesive public narrative around what it stands for, not just what it is against. But you have to recognize that that process is a very long and tricky one. You know, it took almost 100 years of a freedom movement to get Nehru to write Discovery of India and to come up with a vision for what a new India looks like. In the face of the political disruptions that you've seen in the past 10 years, but actually over the course of the last 3 decades, with the rise of Hindutva, with the rise of the BJP on the national level, but also with the rise of a polarizing rhetoric, you are now forced to question the very ideals that were set in place by the founders of this country, right? Institutions that you never thought would be compromised are now getting compromised. Values that you thought were commonplace and integral to being Indian, such as secularism, are being denounced as anti-Indian or un-Indian, right? So in such a circumstance and a scenario, I don't think it's enough just to say we'll go back to the past. We're going to have to say what is a new future that we're crafting, and the new future is a deadly one, right? We've got climate change threatening our very existence. We've got the rise of AI presenting a very different sort of scenario for the future of jobs. You've seen a complete disruption of market forces that transform how the global economy works and how trade between countries works. You've also seen the collapse of international institutions. Gone are the days when we depend upon the UN to sort of mediate on all issues and be the voice of reason. Today, you're in a winner eats all, doggy eat dog world where there is no international world order anymore, and we watch helplessly as Israel bombs Gaza and sort of reduces it to rubble, right? So what are we imagining? What are the core values that we built from?
So in recent days, I've realized that a lot of these people say that, oh, we can't stand with Palestine as Indians because Palestine would never ever support us. They only support Pakistan to have Kashmir. What is this, Anish?
So see, the poor Palestinian envoy in New Delhi must have gotten tired of receiving requests to clarify whether or not Palestine stands with Pakistan on this issue, because the reality is India was one of the first countries to recognize Palestine. Our foreign policy has always been grounded in recognizing the need for a two-state solution, and Palestine has been one of our firmest and strongest allies in the past and hopefully in the future as well. So this logic just doesn't hold water, you know. And the problem is you automatically assume कि अच्छा मुसलमान देश है तो हमारे खिलाफ है. Immediate logic is used कि अच्छा, see how they treat women in Palestine, see how they treat queer people in Palestine. Are you are gay supporting Palestine? That's like what? Chickens for KFC. And I'm like, मतलब क्या पेड़ों के लिए आवाज उठाने के लिए मैं क्या पेड़ बनना जरूरी है? And you're behaving as if everything is hunky dory here. So the unfortunate framing of this in such a reductive way that ignores the suffering of millions of people, it comes from a absence of care. You know, the crisis we also have today in our country today is a crisis of care. We've forgotten what it means to care for each other. We've forgotten that, you know, you might have to leave your political differences aside at some points, including on the left and the right, right? I'm not saying this is a crisis of care that's only on one side of the ideological spectrum. You know, I think there's a way in which you've gotten used to a overwhelming dominance of a right-wing politics that continuously dehumanizes you, right? And that has lasting consequences. It's a controversial topic, but you know, Charlie Kirk's killing. Obviously, I don't like the guy, right? He's been the biggest homophobe ever. He's been anti-Indian. Will I mourn him or put some fool on his grave? Of course not. what will I celebrate in a strange way? I think we've descended into a sort of mob mentality frenzy, into this frenzy that celebrates violence because violence is perpetuated against us to such an extent.
The counter to that would be, because of his rhetoric, there are states in America, Republican-run states, who have banned abortion, and due to which a lot of women who wanted to get abortion, they could.
Of course. I mean,
Is it death only bad when an individual does it? Does state-sponsored death not count? Because in that sense, he's responsible for millions of.
no, I mean, firstly, my views on the other part of this are also controversial because I'm frankly completely against the death penalty, right? I believe that the death penalty has no place in a modern society. I've stood against the death penalty for Ajmal Kasab. I've stood against the death penalty for Nirbhaya's rapists. That's a principle I hold very dear to me. I've stood against the death penalty even for the Badlapur rapist, which was a very difficult stance for me to take in my role as a spokesperson for a political party. So, should the state have monopoly over violence? No. Should the state be sort of capable of carrying out the death penalty? No. So, neither should an individual, right? So, for me, that answer is crystal clear about Charlie Kirk.
Justifying the death, of course, but what we are saying is if Charlie Kirk's rhetoric has directly led to violence and deaths, those people affected by it, those communities affected by it, if they want to celebrate his death, what is wrong with that?
The problem is, by celebrating his death, you're normalizing a culture of political violence that will harm those who are going to face the brunt of this political violence first, right? What is going to happen by celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, right? You're going to provide fodder to say that political violence is acceptable. Who has the guns?
But then again, we ourselves as men, not being directly affected and also living in a country.
Well, I as a gay man directly being affected, yeah, is rhetoric.
But we live in India. In a sense, we are not directly affected. But the community.
नहीं, Andrew Tate को इधर देखते थे लोग, Charlie Kirk को भी देखते थे. I mean, I say this as somebody
playing the devil's advocate. The community is actually being affected. Say, women who couldn't get an abortion because of his rhetoric leading to policies. Are we in a position to really lecture them and tell them, look, I mean, you...
No, of course, nobody's lecturing or telling them, right? I'm saying that this is what we've been reduced to, right? The problem today is...
devil's advocate.
No, you should, but it's a good stance to take, right? But I'm saying this is precisely the problem, right? We've lost a politics of care because a politics of violence has immobilized us, right? What happens? My response is, I don't know what to do. I can celebrate Charlie Kirk's death, right? We've lost faith in all systems. And this is particularly concerning as somebody who's part of an established political party and who is not a revolutionary, right? I would not be in electoral politics if I was a revolutionary. There's some part of me that believes in reform over revolution, right? And there's valid critiques of revolution and there's valid critiques of reformist positions as well. There's a lot of people, including several of my dear friends, who would say we are beyond the point of reform. The system is so broken that it needs to be completely dismantled before it gets fixed. But we have been reduced to not knowing what to do in the face of people like Charlie Kirk. How do you take a Charlie Kirk down, right? Celebrate his death, no problem. What next? How are we going to support Planned Parenthood to ensure that people who can't get abortions in red states can go to blue states to get abortions? There was a time when people like Martin Luther King was smuggled into red states and taken for rallies, and that was the momentum that drove a certain politics. You were hopeful, you were excited, you were confident that you could make a change happen even in the face of all of that oppression, right? That momentum is over today. What I'm sad about with the celebration of Charlie Kirk's death is that that's where it ends, right? What happens after? How do we build communities? How do we build sustainable ways to make change? How do we change the city councillor to ensure that eventually your senator changes, or in a city like Delhi, you change your municipal corporator, so you change the MLA, then you can change the MP, then you can change the government. We've given up in all of these systems because they have failed us.
Your vote matters. A strong democracy begins with responsible voting. आपका वोट important है. एक strong democracy की शुरुआत होती है responsible voting से.
Talking about the increasing political divide, we have seen an increase in Islamophobic sentiments in India across states and
across the political spectrum also. वो बड़ा problem है.
Now, the thing is, many people look at BJP as the main villain here. Even if we assume that BJP loses power, is some other party in power, but जो लोगों का जो मानसिकता है, that Islamophobic beliefs, that is still going to be there And the mainstream media has, for the last decade or so, has done a great job in grinding that narrative in the youth. So once, say, I.N.D.I Alliance comes to power, what would you do? How would you deprogram the minds of the youth?
Deradicalization is one of the fundamental challenges in the world today, right? Regardless of what ideology you are confronting. For me, that is through a politics of care. It can't come through a replacement of one form of hate with another form of hate. To me, it's been very important that people read poetry, people read novels. You expand your mind. You try to understand that you can learn about the lived experience of someone who is not you without having a necessarily judgmental framework. इस देश में सबसे बड़ी प्रॉब्लम है कि सभी लोग नॉन फिक्शन पढ़ते हैं, सभी सीखना चाहते हैं. किताब क्यों पढ़ो? सीखना है. सीखना बंद करो, सोचना बंद करो, चीजों को महसूस करो. Feel, don't think. That's the only way to confront hate, right? I mean, traveling across now the country in this position, it's become evident that the rot runs much deeper than just the BJP, right? This has been going on for a while. It's not एक बार सरकार बदलेगी तो ये पूरा इस्लामोफोबिया चला जाएगा, ऐसे होने नहीं वाला है. शायद 50 साल लगेंगे, शायद in our lifetimes we won't see the end of it.
The policy prescriptions, I mean, this would be a general guideline that people should read.
Honestly, it would be reading poetry. I genuinely think I would change syllabi to include reading poetry and a diverse set of poetry. I mean, let people read Muslim poets, right? Let people read Muslim authors. You can't change. I mean, policy prescription, acha chalo, enact anti-hate speech laws, enact this, enact that, sure. People who know far more than me on those fronts can opine on that. I have a degree in literature, yaar. हमें तो पढ़ना लिखना आता है. तो मेरे लिए it's not a question of retributive justice.
Anish, talking about syllabi, where we'll talk a little about education in India.
हाँ.
है ना? तो अभी मैं एक बार एक इंस्टाग्राम पे रील देख रही थी एंड कोई बहुत ही फेमस सीनियर पॉलिटिकल लीडर हैड गॉन टू मीट चिल्ड्रन एंड क्वेश्चन पूछा गया हु वाज द फर्स्ट पर्सन टू गो टू स्पेस. So I just thought that, it's a fundamental duty that we are supposed to encourage scientific thinking. ये मतलब ये सब तो हो गया, ठीक है, चैप्टर्स भी चेंज कर दिए, सिलेबस भी चेंज कर दिया, तो हम कहाँ जा रहे हैं? मतलब
I'll tell you a funny story with this, right? Who is the first person to have gone to space was something we learnt in school. Yuri Gagarin.
Yuri Gagarin, yes.
It became a moment of pride for me when I used to travel, because I used to know that and very few other people across the world knew that. कि वो तो सब नील आर्मस्ट्रॉन्ग बोलते थे, right? हमारे पॉलिटिशियन साहब ने तो कहा भी था कि इट वाज नॉट नील आर्मस्ट्रॉन्ग बट हनुमान. दोनों आंसर गलत थे. तो इट टेक्स अ सर्टेन लेवल ऑफ स्किल टू बी रॉन्ग इवन इन द पॉइंट यू आर ट्राइंग टू प्रूव रॉन्ग. पर अभी खासियत ही वही है.
Here what I mean is कि आप ये सब बोल देते हो.
नहीं पर मैं वही कह रहा हूँ, राइट? आई थिंक व्हाट द गवर्नमेंट हैज फॉरगॉटन इसकी, चलो आप बदलो सिलेबस, आई एम इन फेवर. You think the syllabus is biased, you change the syllabus. But to what end? Today, you are the least interesting place in the world to study. 60 years ago, there were more international students in India as a percentage of population of students in the country than there are today. Students from across the non-aligned world, from Indonesia, from Senegal, from even from South Africa at points, were coming to India to study. From our neighbors, they were coming to study. आज कोई नहीं आ रहा है. हमारे लोग बांग्लादेश जा रहे हैं मेडिकल एजुकेशन लेने के लिए. ये बोलते रहते हैं ना, बांग्लादेशी इन्फिल्ट्रेटर्स. आप बंद करो वीजा इंडियंस को देना. वो क्यों जा रहे हैं बांग्लादेश? this is what we've been reduced to. Your universities have fallen in any kind of ranking conceivable. JNU, which used to be one of the centers of learning in the world, has now been reduced to rubble by an incompetent vice chancellor and a failure of an administrative department that has led to a complete educational paralysis. Delhi University, same problem. Mumbai University, which I have seen crumble in front of my eyes, same problem. So, आप एक तरफ बोल रहे हो कि मेक इन इंडिया, bring in foreign investment, get in the best talent to the country. Your best talent is leaving the country. All your intelligent young people are leaving the country. जो निकल सकता है ना वो निकल रहा है. आपका इंडिया शाइनिंग मूवमेंट बहुत जल्दी आ रहा है. इसीलिए you'll see it. 2014, what did Modi ji say? विकास.
कौन है?
2019, oh, कौन है? 2019, what did Modi ji say? पाकिस्तान. 2024 में ना ही विकास था ना ही पाकिस्तान, सिर्फ हिंदू मुसलमान था. That's all they have left now, right? You can't claim to be a superpower. Your claims of 5 trillion economy are also slowly fading away from the public discourse because you're like 2025 तक आने वाली थी, अभी 2030 बन गया है, फिर 2047 विकसित भारत हो जाएगा, फिर 2200 हो जाएगा. I mean, at some point the charade needs to stop because people are realizing कि you sold them false gold.
People are realizing a lot of things. There was one more thing that I noticed recently. Parliamentarians are able to say anything. Okay, you are a spokesperson, you can say anything. ठीक है, कोई common इंसान अगर कुछ बोलता है तो क्या होता है उसके साथ?
UAPA लग जाता है. बस
यार ऐसा ना बोलो, फिर मैं नहीं जाना है ये सब जेल वेल में.
नहीं ऐसे नहीं, because
कोई नहीं जिल जाएगा. हमारे यहाँ पे एक शट अप इंडिया कैंपेन शुरू है, तो वी आर ऑल सहभागी इन शट अप इंडिया. तो इंस्टेड ऑफ गोइंग टू जेल वी विल जस्ट शट अप. So it's the only successful campaign actually. If we look at its success everywhere, we've all shut up.
That is true. Like मेरे को भी डर लग रहा है कुछ क्वेश्चंस पूछने में ना, बट
हाँ?
पूछ रहे हैं यार, थोड़ा सा गट्स लेकर आ रहा है. हमारे साथ अनीश जी आए हैं.
तो अभी वही प्रॉब्लम है कि कोई बोल नहीं रहा है, कोई सोच नहीं रहा है, and it makes for a less fun world, you know. I mean, forget that. I mean, there have been times when I've had debates with RSS pracharaks. You've had like serious discussions that used to power the intellectual life of this country. I mean, it's very boring to have everyone have the same opinion. Forget all of the other things. I come from a position of privilege. I'm like, क्या चल रहा है? आप मतलब खुद की ideology को ही मार रहे हो, because an ideology is only as strong as the other ideologies it can be tested against.
टॉकिंग ऑफ प्रिविलेज, और आपने दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी और यूनिवर्सिटीज़ की बात करी थी. अभी DUSU इलेक्शंस वर हैपनिंग, दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी स्टूडेंट्स इलेक्शंस, एंड वी हैव सीन फ्रॉम बोथ द मेन पार्टीज NSUI एंड ABVP, पैसा, गाड़ी, मसल पावर. एंड दीज किड्स, आई मीन अंबानी के बच्चे हैं या स्टूडेंट्स हैं, वो समझ नहीं आता है. Is it true that in Indian politics, if you want to enter as a youth, you need to have money, you need to have connections, you need to have privilege, and if you don't have those things, politics is not for you?
There's 2 ways of answering that question. The first is yes, right? If I didn't come from a dominant caste background, if I didn't come with class privilege, if I didn't come from an urban center, if I hadn't studied abroad, if I didn't have the opportunity to work abroad and live in India, would I have been as successful as I am today? Would I have gotten as far as I've gotten in such a short amount of time? No. Right? Despite being queer, right? I mean, the queerness is one limiting factor, but there are a lot of other enabling factors there. But on the other hand, we've had a strong culture of creating pathways into politics that don't require all of these things, right? So some of our best politicians and our finest politicians have been farmers leaders, right? They've come from the grassroots because वो लोगों से जुड़े हुए. Pawar Sahib came from Baramati as a farmers leader. Build those networks to support, because पैसा, जायदाद, नाम आपको इधर तक ले जा सकती है. उसके बाद you'll have to prove yourself, right? Somebody who doesn't come with all of that will need to work ground up. But the connect that they will build with the people will be more important, right? So student politics was one of these other spaces that was really remarkable in its ability to throw up new political leadership. वहाँ पे पैसे की जरूरत नहीं थी. You could actually sort of create your political reputation within a university setup, so it's not dominated by the amount of money and the kind of politics that you see in a Lok Sabha election or a Vidhan Sabha election. Similarly, trade union politics was another place where lots of incredible leaders sort of emerged, right? Including in a city like Mumbai, which is a union city. You also had other pathways into politics, which included things ranging from cartoonists like Basaheb Thackeray to other forms of public oratory, like people who were Lok Shahirs who entered politics. And of course, then you had an identity politics framework where marginalized groups formed sort of alliances within their own communities and created political leaderships, right? तो यहाँ सभी जगहों में आज एक बदलाव आ गया है, which is stifling young people from entering any of these systems. And you can't see this as just a problem with politics. You have to see it as a larger problem with the state of precarity that people in India find themselves in. आज इंसान को पैसा चाहिए क्योंकि उसको पता नहीं है अगले बार पैसा कहाँ से आएगा, right? I can't blame the person taking money in politics because the voter doesn't know where his next meal is going to come from. When you put your country in such a state of precarity where everybody is reduced to being a Uber driver, delivery partner or gig worker, they are going to have to go and get money at every instance from wherever they can, right? And so money is going to be important for them in politics. It's only when somebody can convince someone that पैसे वहां से लो, यहां से भी लो, पर वोट मेरे लिए दो, that you will see a true change taking place, because then they'll have to have faith in that person. We've lost faith in our elected representatives. But today look at the changing ground realities. पहले अगर आपके पास पैसा नहीं होता तो आपको मीडिया इंटरव्यू नहीं मिलता, आपके पास पैसे नहीं होता तो आप रैली नहीं होल्ड कर सकते थे, अगर आपके पास पैसा नहीं होता तो आप आपके बैनर पोस्टर ये नहीं लगा सकते थे. आज सोशल मीडिया के साथ, I mean, this podcast reaches more people than most English news channels. So the opportunities exist. How will a new political leadership emerge out of these opportunities is something we'll have to wait for. I think it's too premature to say कि young people can't enter politics, are not entering politics. आ रहे हैं भाई. Young people are entering politics unlike ever before. They're getting elected unlike ever before. Young people who don't come from political families. I don't come from a political family. 20 years ago, my journey would have been impossible. You know? So the fact that it's made possible today, even with my privilege, is a sign of the changing times. The fact that young people are getting elected to corporations, to panchayats, to MLA-ships also. You've seen some incredible young MPs come up in parliament also right now. Someone like an Ikra Chaudhary from the SP. The SP has actually had a fair few of them, you know. Pushpendra Saroj, another incredible young MP from the SP. You've seen great young MPs from the Congress also. This tide is turning, and it's turning for the better.
But if you look at the larger political culture in the youth, where they engage with issues and people who they listen to, whose opinions matter, someone like you for that matter, in this space where on one side of the spectrum you have someone like Arundhati Roy, and the other side of the spectrum someone like Jai Sai Deepak, and you somewhere in between.
Never heard Arundhati Roy and Jai Sai Deepak mentioned in the same sentence. What world have we come on to?
Two sides of the spectrum, and that's the beauty of the diverse thought in India. Yeah. But one thing which, I mean, in terms of diversity of thought, we have a plenty, but in terms of diversity of the caste composition of these voices, we don't see any. And how do we deal with that? And you come from, again, a party which talks about the caste census and progressive reforms, but yahan pe, the top, where the voices matter, where if we don't see Dalit voices, Adivasi voices, how can we, these communities coming from the margins, how can we even trust these parties? Because in ideology, you can claim to speak.
You know, I'll tell you quite honestly, right? I can give you performative numbers that sort of highlight my point. I can tell you Bhaskar Bhagre sir is from an Adivasi community, he is one of our MPs. I can tell you that Shashikant Shindeji, who's my state party president, is a Mathadi Kamgar community sort of politician. I can tell you that we have incredible leaders across the sort of spectrum, including promising young Muslim leaders like Fahad Ahmad, who's also a dear friend of mine. But that is all performative, right? I can give you that for any party. If you ask me to be a spokesperson for the Samajwadi Party tomorrow, मैं ऐसे आपको नाम बता देता. That spokesperson hat, I can give you those answers, right? Participation in politics by marginalized communities is made difficult by three things. One is a lack of access to resources. आप कार्यकर्ता तब बन पाओगे ना जब आपका रोटी कपड़ा मकान is not a problem, right? If you have a रोटी कपड़ा मकान problem, आपके पास कहाँ टाइम है किसी नेता के पीछे भागना? And the problem is this industry is still a सबके पीछे भागो and be seen industry, right? So you have to be seen. How are you going to be seen if you're working 12 to 16 hours a day, right? The second reason for a lack of effective political participation amongst marginalized communities across the spectrum, but particularly on caste, in sort of political parties, is that we have to confront the reality that there has been a ghettoizing of caste in politics. We have to confront the reality also that reservation of seats based upon caste arithmetic and presence of a certain caste in that constituency is a hurdle rather than an enabler of emancipatory politics. Why do I say that? अभी कैसे है ना, बहुत दलित एक constituency में है तो SC constituency, बहुत आदिवासी एक constituency में है तो ST constituency, when are we going to see a Dalit or Adivasi person being the MP for Mumbai South? आज अगर आप दलित हो, आप आदिवासी हो, कोई और कुछ है, अगर आप ओबीसी हो, आप पार्टी के पास जाओ तो पार्टी बोलेगी अच्छा आप मतलब जनरल पे मत लड़ो, आप आपके एससी पे लड़ो, एसटी पे लड़ो. अरे भाई मेरी कंस्टिट्यूएंसी ये है, मैं दलित हूँ, मैं आदिवासी हूँ, मैं ओबीसी हूँ, दिस इज द कंस्टिट्यूएंसी आई नो बेस्ट, हाउ एम आई गोइंग टू जस्ट पैराशूट माई सेल्फ समवेयर एल्स and fight from there?
Regardless of the contribution people make as a Dalit, you are still reduced to being a Dalit leader.
Correct.
We have seen the same with Dr. Ambedkar himself, whose contributions was immense. But we remember him as a Dalit leader, is what unfortunately ends up happening.
And there is an inherent contradiction there also, right? Because you also don't want to not remember him as a Dalit leader. So for me, this is a big problem. Am I a queer politician? Am I a politician? Right? Can I be both? How often can I speak on queer rights? How vocal can I be on queerness? Will that make people discredit my opinions on other issues? It's a challenge you have to live with, right?
Same, it's like I talk about caste issues primarily, and if I give my opinion on say anything else, they're like, oh, stick to caste. What are you doing? Yeah.
So this is a major challenge, right? And this is what we've ghettoized ourselves into. And this to me requires effective political imagination to counter. Again, right? With reservation and political sort of seats. Perhaps it's time to reinvent the wheel and say that women's seats in India, reservation for the municipal corporations and panchayats happen through lottery. In the Mumbai Municipal Corporation, a school student is asked to pick chairs and from 227 wards, and I think we have 50% reservation for women, na? So 50% wo kaun si seats reserved hai gets decided like that. Perhaps you need that for SC, ST, OBC also. Randomized reservation, right? But we've become, again, this is what I'm saying, right? Ki we're so overwhelmed by the hate that is around us. We're so overwhelmed by the nature of the challenges around us कि जो अच्छे solutions बनाने हैं सत्ता में आने के बाद उनके बारे में हम सोच ही नहीं रहे. क्या करोगे आप? चलो मोदी जी हट गए. 2029 India Alliance comes to power. What are we doing after that? Right? What do we need to change? It's not like Modi ji आने के पहले सब ठीक ठाक चल रहा था. It's not like the country was perfect before Modi ji. We make that mistake, right? It's the same mistake in some ways Nehru made, right? In discovery of India. And I say this very often, ki Nehru's discovery of India presumes that India before the British was perfect. That caste was not a problem, patriarchy was not a problem, religious differences and religious divides were not a problem. It comes from a activist POV also. वो बोलना चाहते थे कि the British are the sole problem in the country and so overthrowing them is a priority. As a political strategy, perhaps good. But that's the same logic the BJP now uses. India was great before the British and the Muslims. They've just shifted the clock a few hundred years back, right? They're not reinventing the wheel. We have to stop imagining the BJP to be, again, the BJP considers itself to be a revolutionary force. But it's not really that revolutionary. They're using the same rule book and changing the parameters a little bit. It's like वो कट कॉपी पेस्ट कर दिया, मतलब चैट जीपीटी से थोड़ा सा बदल दिया और कह दिया कि m dash आप नहीं लगाएंगे क्योंकि m dash से पता चलता है चैट जीपीटी है. That's what the BJP is doing, right? They're taking the same model and they're turning it on its head. So those solutions that we are being prevented from finding or looking forward towards.
Personal question. You have a thorough understanding of political philosophy. You did acknowledge that political imagination is what we are lacking. Why do you want to limit yourself being a spokesperson for a party? Why don't you be that person who does the reimagination for us?
So, I don't think those are mutually exclusive. I think I'm very grateful to be spokesperson. नहीं तो ऐसी बातचीत हमें करने नहीं मिलती. And in some ways, right, I think being a party spokesperson, one, allows you to be in very different rooms every day. That this work of thinking can't be done in isolation. I'm not somebody who likes to sort of sit in one room and like keep doing stuff. A few days ago I was in Nashik because we had our Akrosh Morcha on farmers issues. Day before that I was at an OBC meeting about Maratha reservation and its impact on OBC quotas. A day before that I was in Bhusawal talking about the banana crisis because crops have been destroyed by unseasonal rainfall. And these are ways in which you really sort of have to learn more about what you're talking about before you start talking about.
One very interesting thing I noted when you were explaining these issues is that the youth are getting increasingly political, sure, they're being aware, but they're only being aware of the national level issues. But then the local level issues कोई बात ही नहीं करता.
तो वही प्रॉब्लम है ना. तो मेरा भी कभी कभी ऐसी प्रॉब्लम हो जाता है कि हम नेशनल स्पोक्सपर्सन है, सो आई हैव टू कीप टॉकिंग अबाउट नेशनल इश्यूज. The only thing that I've said for 5 years before coming on to national issues is focus on the local. कि पहले आप आपके कॉर्पोरेटर को जानो, आपके पंचायत समिति को जानो, चलो आपके एमएलए तक को जानो, चीफ मिनिस्टर छोड़ दो, प्रधानमंत्री छोड़ दो, एमपी छोड़ दो, right? That's also a factor of algorithms and the way in which we're consuming information. You're on Instagram, I'm on Instagram, you're on Instagram. Most people watching this will find us through Instagram. The more views you have, the more likely you are to be recommended to somebody. The natural corollary to that is that you will have more views on something that is relevant to more people. National mudda becomes relevant to the whole country. Why does somebody sitting in Punjab want to worry about what is happening to banana farmers in Jalgaon? They don't care. Right? वो इनफैक्ट बोलेंगे कि अरे ये जलगांव का स्टोरी आ रहा है, मेरे पंजाब का स्टोरी क्यों नहीं आ रहा है? The same thing happens, you know.
Same when we go through your profile also. Some stories, yeah, national, and some stories are, you know, Nashik se hai, Maharashtra se.
And that's the blend that you have to find, right? That you keep that audience engaged, and then you try to sort of sensitize that audience to newer perspectives. But again, the solution to this problem is not going to come through the sources of information and knowledge sharing that we currently have. Today, the reality is we spend most of our time on the internet. I know how to tap into a national audience, global audience even, right? Young people today are not talking to only people in India. They're talking to people across the world. They're sharing memes. They're creating sort of subcultures. वो कौन सा Italian tra-la-la-la trend has become a trend here? किसको था बचा? You know, mummy, I speak Italian means I speak Italian brain rot. Like, what world are we living in today, right? So, in such a world where we are so globally connected, we have to find ways of being locally connected. What are those ways? I don't know.
An extended critique of that, as Indians living in India, at least in the sober circles or at least the educated English-speaking circles, more people know about Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro than...
No, but I'll correct you there. It's not just about sober circles or people living in privileged circles. You know, I was in Karanja, which is in Yavatmal Washim district. It's a very backward part of the state. It's been systematically neglected by various governments, including, I will admit, our own. We had a women's rally over there and a sabha. 50% of middle-aged women in Karanja were on YouTube. YouTube चला रहे थे. Imagine, I mean, this is political awareness that would not have existed a few decades ago. So I'm not ever saying that anybody knowing about Charlie Kirk or the world is a problem.
It's not a problem.
Or a bad thing, right? That the woman in Karanja now knows more maybe about just Maharashtra because she's consuming content mainly in Marathi than she did before, right? Maybe some of that content is being translated into English, or English content is being translated into Marathi and she's consuming some of it. Maybe she's chanced upon BBC Marathi where I gave an interview in Marathi about being queer and she's suddenly finding out what being queer means, right? So the expansive possibilities of this are very exciting to me. I mean, we've forgotten to be excited by the internet and the possibilities it unlocks. But the counter that needs to be suggested is कि यार नोएडा वालों का Slack channel कब बनने वाला है? या सेक्टर 18 का Slack channel कब बनने वाला है कि आप बोल सको कि यार हम सब सेक्टर 18 में रहते हैं. The only alternative we found is, God forbid, a WhatsApp group for your RWA. That's the closest we come to local community.
I mean, to be fair, Reddit is doing a good job.
But everyone's not on Reddit.
Yeah.
You were talking about access to the internet everywhere. I just wanted to know about Maharashtra. I read a couple of news articles, and this news has been there since 2001, apparently. There are a lot of hysterectomies for
farm laborers, particularly in sugarcane plantations.
Yes.
It's a very big problem. Some of the most incredible artists. The last year, the India Art Fair Artists in Residence did an incredible project on this. And I'm completely forgetting her name, but I will let you know in the comments or in some sort of way that can be put over here. But again, right, it's a big challenge. Why is it happening?
Is this feminism?
You know, no, we'll stop it there. But no, it's not because, you know, crazy part is women are getting hysterectomies for two reasons, right? Of course, one is because they can't afford to get a period. It's 5 days of work gone, 5 days of productive labor gone, particularly in the middle of harvest season, right? So got around 40 days to make your money, 60 days to make your money, and very often for some of them it's make your money for the whole year, right? Because you're on a sugarcane sort of plantation, other crops don't require that sort of intense harvesting. Some of you are going to get jobs on sugarcane, some of you are not going to get jobs on other crops, etc., etc. So this is your time to earn for the whole year, right? So 5 days is too much to waste, and so they get a hysterectomy. For the other side of that, and the more sort of difficult side of that, is that they get hysterectomies because they simply don't want to give birth to more children. And they get these in secret, so their husbands don't know, right? It's how you've seen a lot of vasectomies or tubectomies also taking place.
Lack of birth control awareness.
Or rather, sexual violence, right? Perpetuated by men who say that I want you to have more children. And the woman is like, I don't want to have more children because how am I going to take care of them? And
Marital, can't say the word, but yeah.
So this is a bigger crisis. And for some of these things, politics can be one way of making a difference, but it can't be the only way. And for me, this question about local communities and even your question about hysterectomies becomes important because in some ways the politician is supposed to be that nodal point who can have these difficult conversations in a community, who can make this change possible. Abhi ke liye, and populist politics across the board, including populist politics that might be perpetuated by my party or by those who are in opposition to the BJP, is a bad thing. Because we assume that politicians should respond to what voters want, not that politicians should also engage in a transformational process to ensure that voters can sometimes be uplifted or emancipated from their own prejudices, from their own sort of problems, right? And that's where the work is. One of the biggest challenges we have today is that every single political party in this country has given up on the urban voter. बोल देते कि शहरों में रह रहे हो ना आप, बीजेपी के लिए वोट दोगे. To their credit, AAP was the first party that came in and said, no, we'll challenge the BJP in a city. Most other parties, mine including, have challenged the BJP in rural areas because farmers' distress is a real concern. In a city, we'll be like, अच्छा दलित area में या मुसलमान area में हम जीत सकते हैं. You've given up on a sort of upper caste population. You've given up on a Savarna population that is upper class. You can't give up. You can critique, sure, but you can't give your political party boss, you can't give up to reform them. Harder task. Winning that seat might take 30 years. But if you give up on that seat entirely, then you're compromising the very fundamental aspect of what it means to do politics, which is to bring about change.
Why is it that the general sentiment is that if you are a supporter of Congress or any opposing party, you are anti-national? Go to Pakistan. Why does that happen?
Urban Naxal, anti-national, these are all now badges of honor. We should all wear them as badges of honor. Because that just means you're anti-BJP. But it's sad because you've reduced nationalism to something so petty that now it doesn't inspire the same level of pride in a country that it used to inspire. Right?
We end up doing is the offense is the best defense. So rather than them labeling us anti-national, say you want a Hindu Rashtra, you want to change the core of the constitution, you are the real anti-national. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's
because every single citizen standing up for transparency, for accountability is a true Deshbhakt. आप ही anti-national हो. आप इस देश के खिलाफ जा रहे हो, देश के संविधान के खिलाफ जा रहे हो, आपको संविधान बदलना है, आपने बोल दिया संविधान बदलना है, आप ही एंटी-नेशनल हो और कोई एंटी-नेशनल हो कैसे सकता है?
Questions from the audience. I don't want to ask you this, but then a lot of people requested. Yeah. The question of the Marathi language in Maharashtra, and लोग कह रहे हैं कि मराठी नहीं बोलने पे मार रहे हैं. Some videos have come up, so people want to know what's your party's take, what's your take.
One, all violence in the name of language deserves to be condemned. As a party, we condemn it unequivocally. Second part, political violence is embedded into the structure of our politics today. Don't see कि मराठी नहीं बोल रहे इसीलिए मार रहे. शिवसेना का एमएलए कैंटीन वर्कर को मार रहा है क्योंकि उसने उसको सड़ा हुआ खाना दे दिया. विधान भवन में गोपीचंद पडलकर भारतीय जनता पार्टी के एमएलए लोगों को मार रहे हैं because they didn't like what Jitendra Awad, my party leader, said. देश के हर कोने में गौरक्षा के नाम पे मुसलमानों को लोग मार रहे हैं. So political violence has become a big problem. Somebody who thinks they disagree with you thinks that they have the right to hit you. Right? What an individual Karyakarta does on an ideological issue needs to be condemned. But that does not mean that ideological issue in and of itself is wrong. Right? Where is this sentiment for Marathi Bollats Paije coming from? You know? Particularly in progressive circles also. Progressive circles are the worst on this.
Yeah.
Because they don't understand these questions. You are seeing widespread gentrification in every single city in this country. Right? On one hand, you're seeing an inflow of privilege. Rich people are buying up houses where middle class people used to live. Big towers are coming up where smaller buildings or chawls used to exist. Urban centers like Girgaon, which was Girangaon, which was the land of mill workers, is now filled with Lodha's towers, which are populated by people who never were in Mumbai to start off with. Right? So you are displacing people who've lived in these chawls for centuries and sending them to Badlapur, you're sending them to Ulhasnagar, you're sending them into the back of beyond, where they don't have access to schools, where they don't have access to the same opportunities that they did earlier, and where they're displaced from where they used to work.
And they're replaced by people coming from other states. Mostly.
They're replaced by people coming from other states who are predominantly wealthy. Right?
Similar issue in Bangalore also.
Similar issue across the board. The other challenges, and this is a national level conversation we have to have. Some people, I'm glad, in the states where this is happening from are also acknowledging it. The problem is, you have a country that is called India. You can't restrict migration and you should not restrict migration. But what happens to the third generation of the migrant worker? Right? The first generation of migrant workers who came to Mumbai came to build the city. The Kolis are the original inhabitants of Mumbai. So everyone else apart from them is a migrant to the city. So nobody has the right to claim we are original Mool Nivasi, etc. etc. Right? What happened to the original migrant workers were the mill workers who came to Mumbai. They came as single men. They were often cheaper to hire because they didn't have families to take care of. They were living 6 people to a room and working in the mills day and night and going back and sort of sustaining themselves. They were cheap labor. Slowly over time, they formed unions. They found a way to get social stability. They earned more money. They started having families. They started settling down in Mumbai. They created a setup in which they could operate. Now, their children started working in smaller jobs. They were not mill workers, but they were working as postmen. They were probably working as drivers. They were working as people working in restaurants. They were working in larger hotels. They were working class, right? They have now grown older. These are the people who have an anti-immigrant sentiment. Why? Because today, the same person who was working as a driver is being replaced by somebody else. No, he's being replaced by somebody else who's now coming as a single person from another space to Mumbai, right? Because now this person has a wife and kids.
It's a larger systemic issue.
It's a much bigger systemic issue because now somebody from UP and Bihar who doesn't have a family to support can work for 15,000 rupees a month, right?
So it's economic anxiety manifesting as xenophobia.
But it's economic exclusion, right? Because he can't afford to work for less than 25,000 rupees a month because otherwise how is he going to send his child to school? How is he going to pay his bills? How is he going to pay for electricity, water, food, transport? The person who's moved recently, who is very similar, funnily enough, to the person's father who is opposing him, can afford to do all of this at a much lower price. And you're seeing the rich being complicit in this, right?
Yeah, obviously.
Housing societies in Mumbai have rate cards that say you can't pay your maid or driver more than this amount. So your real enemy
Capitalism
is not the ban coming from UP or Bihar. It's the system that is thriving off of that cheap labor. And that's what we've forgotten, right? So the Marathi language debate is at its heart an economic debate that has forgotten the trade union roots of a city like Mumbai. That's forgotten the class politics that drove the city for so long. That's forgotten the George Fernandez that a city like Mumbai produced.
Again, coming from a South Indian POV, we largely agree that capitalism here would be the issue. But the other thing is the 3-language policy. In the South, we believe, look, we learn English, we speak our own language, and sometimes it's expected of us to we learn a third language, which we feel that देखो North में UP Bihar में तो कोई सीख नहीं रहा है Telugu Tamil. Why should we, on the other hand, learn a third language? I think Maharashtra, on the other hand,
we accept the 3 languages. I'll tell you very honestly, we're like, at this point we've had so much in migration that you can't prevent Hindi from being an important language in Maharashtra. We're a very practical, pragmatic state. हमें हिंदी से कोई बैर नहीं, right? Our problem with this 3-language policy was you can't teach kids 3 languages from class 1. आप 5 साल के बच्चे को 3 भाषाएं सिखाओगे तो बच्चा क्या सीखेगा, right? It's impossible with the state of government schools currently to be able to teach kids 3 languages. So the language that will obviously be marginalized in this case is Marathi. Now this has 3 problems to it, right? One is that it's an insult to Marathi, and Maharashtra, we've got a linguistic division of states. 2, the person disadvantaged in all of this is the Marathi child going to school, right? Because his core language that he's familiar with, he is not able to get a good quality of instruction in, which leads to a shutting down of Marathi schools. You've seen a shutting down of Marathi cultural institutions, 700 libraries over the last 5 years, Marathi schools across the state. You're systematically dismantling the social mobility mechanisms that were available to young Marathi people in Maharashtra to succeed. And the third and more fundamental problem is, at the end of all of this, all the students are learning 3 languages badly. I mean, your comprehension skills.
What's happening is they obviously have to learn English for further education opportunities and Hindi for practical reasons. And it's the mother language which gets ignored for the most part.
But I'm saying even forget the mother language getting ignored now. It's adding one full class.
Yeah.
A language class can't be like a geography class or a history class that's only once a week. आप अगर हिंदी पढ़ते हो तो आपको हर रोज हिंदी पढ़नी पड़ती है. अगर आप मराठी पढ़ रहे हो तो आपको हर रोज मराठी पढ़नी पड़ती है. अगर आप अंग्रेजी सीख रहे हो तो every day you have to have English class. If you have 3 classes of 3 languages every day, what other classes will you have?
But then once you allow Hindi as the lingua franca, and it has that cultural heft, obviously Bollywood, everywhere media people consuming are in Hindi, it inevitably replaces the mother language. The mother language becomes something which you only talk to with your parents in a private space. Because it has that heft, and that is what states in the South realize that, Hindi is not...
No, I disagree with this. I think the South has unfortunately been complicit in the destruction of its own languages. In Maharashtra, we have managed to keep Marathi living and vibrant because of supporting cultural institutions, right? The problem we have with this government is not कि आप हिंदी सिखा रहे हो. It's आप मराठी को पैसे नहीं दे रहे. Marathi theatres. Recently, our party had to inaugurate a Marathi theatre in Alibag, which the government should have been doing. Marathi libraries. We have to run the Mumbai Marathi Grantha Sangrahalaya, which the government refused to give 1 rupee for. Marathi cultural institutions. All are facing a decline. You have to put money into culture, right? You have to support culture from thrive to thrive. You have to. Why can't we have grants for small filmmakers? You have Startup India grants. You have grants for AI. You have grants for everything. You have grants for small businesses. Why not grants for culture, right? There is a cultural and creative economy that's worth $5 billion, right? You're not tapping into it. You don't have a vision. That's the problem. Once a language has a vision, it will be able to succeed. There are several languages that have resisted Hindi domination as well and have managed to succeed.
But again, the counterpoint from the South would be Marathi, compared to Hindi, comes more or less from the same language group, shares the same script, whereas Tamil, a completely different Dravidian language, probably no common words also, very, very rare. So for us, it's as different as learning completely, say, Chinese or something, right? It's linguistically very far away. So the South, we cannot really expect to have...
I'm saying nobody should be forced to learn a language they don't want to learn. I'm against the 3-language policy in principle. Right? In Maharashtra, we don't have a large opposition to it because in Maharashtra it works. So we don't mind a 3-language policy for Maharashtra. Should a 3-language policy be there for Tamil Nadu? Of course not. But this is principally a federal argument. Why should you have a national language policy at all? Let states decide. 2 लोग दिल्ली में बैठ के सब decide कर रहे हैं. What language you speak in, what clothes you wear, who you love, what you eat. क्या चल रहा है? These are not questions for the government to decide on at a national level.
Okay, we have a rapid fire round which we do with all our guests. What's your favorite movie?
Jab We Met.
Which is your favorite TV channel?
Colors.
My bad, news channel.
Oh. Tara, I think it's really like because उसपे Big Boss आता है. Big Boss का नाम मराठी. Big Boss Marathi is the best TV show. Best favorite news channel. I can't answer that question. I'll get cancelled. But
Got it.
हाँ,
It's okay.
everyone.
Favorite book or the book you think the youth of India should read?
ये Youth of India should read मैंने सभी किताबें पढ़ो आप. एक किताब recommendation नहीं, but one that meant a lot to me was Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, which is written by a black man about a sort of gay man finding himself in Paris.
Favorite thinker, philosopher?
Very difficult, yeah. To me, somebody I've grappled with a lot in many ways is Nehru. I think thinking through Nehru, not his political action. Nehru, the prime minister, is boring, quite honestly, to me. Nehru, before he becomes prime minister, is far more interesting.
Your favorite politician from history?
From history?
In India, Indian history.
हाँ, पर वो तो बहुत लंबी history है.
एक बता दो ना.
You know, somebody who I've always admired is Yashwantrao Chavan. And a funny story was told to me the other day about him. He was the first Chief Minister of Maharashtra, came to power after the Sanyukta Maharashtra movement. And you know, he had a very fun fashion sense. Because earlier it was only white on white for everybody. And he started wearing white dhotis and colored kurtas. And made a big ripple. And it's something that I've followed on now, which I think is a coincidence that has happened many years later, but a coincidence that I'm very proud of and happy of.
So thank you, Anish. Thank you for having this conversation with us. And there are a lot more questions which people really wanted to ask, but then we have...
So, हम आते रहेंगे. आप बुलाओ नोएडा में, आप बुलाओ हम hop, skip and jump.
We'll definitely see him soon again. That we'll try to. But yeah, it was an amazing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for having me.
Thanks. See you. Bye.
क्या एंडिंग करा दे करके आपने?
नहीं. Okay, guys,
नहीं,
please
अच्छा.
like, share, subscribe कर देना ताकि हम इनके जैसे बहुत अच्छे guests और ला सकें.
Then what I see is someone like you, maybe 20 years down the line, would be like, you know, like Shashi Tharoor is obviously retiring. I see a lot of those flavors.
Listen, Indian politics, nobody retires, huh?
तो जिंदा भी तो रहना है ना.
जियो हजारों साल थरूर साहब. But
Agreed.
there are a lot of people occupying that space. We have some incredible exemplary thinkers in the political arena. They just have not been allowed to get the opportunities that they need to succeed. But you're going to see that change because opposition को भी समझ आ रहा है. आप वही घिसी पिटी चीज करते रहोगे तो आप नहीं जीतोगे. So the opposition is taking more risks than it ever did before and will continue taking more risks. और फिर आपको भी पार्लियामेंट में लेके आएंगे, आपको भी पार्लियामेंट में लेके आएंगे, and you'll have more young people than you ever did before and great thinkers. When we can already have a parliament that discusses and debates instead of...
सोचो समझो और आगे बढ़ो. फील करने के लिए बोल गया है, बुक्स पढ़ो. ठीक है. हाँ, हेट वेट
नॉन फिक्शन नहीं पढ़ो, फिक्शन पढ़ो, पोएट्री पढ़ो.
आर्ट लेकर आओ वापस अंदर, हेट चली जाएगी बाहर.
करेक्ट. दिस इज माय डॉक्टर अनीश गवांदे प्रिस्क्रिप्शन. अब तक पीएचडी तो मिली नहीं है तो डॉक्टर नहीं बोल सकते मैं. थैंक यू वेरी मच.
Thank you.
चलो.